No one remembered to check the barn. The wind had picked up, the flames were quiet, too quiet. But something moved in the dark. Not a man, not a machine, an ox. And what he did next, no one in that family would ever forget. They lived on the kind of land that didn't forgive mistakes. The Coldwell farm sat just outside Clayton Hollow, Arkansas, a patch of red dirt resilience built by hand and held together by stubborn love and rusted nails. The house wasn't big, but it had bones. White clapboard, tin roof, porch swing that creaked like it remembered stories no one dared speak. And out back, across a split rail fence and past a line of wind-sculpted elms, stood the barn. And in that barn lived the ox. His name was Boone. Nobody really remembered who named him, just that it fit. He wasn't pretty, not the kind you saw in children's books or old folk paintings. Boone was scarred, broad like a doorway, with horns that curved inward like held breath. His eyes were dark and low-slung, and he moved like a slow decision. But he watched, always. Even when you thought he was sleeping. Some of the neighbors said he was too mean to keep, that a bull like that didn't belong on a family farm. But William Coldwell knew better. Mean's just another word for misunderstood. He'd say, patting Boone's side like it was made of granite, "He doesn't start trouble, he waits for it." And Boone did wait. In the shadows of the barn, in the silence of dusk, in the hours when children dreamed and dogs slept with both ears up. He was their sentinel, and that, though no one knew it yet, would matter more than anything. William Coldwell wasn't a man of many words. His hands spoke louder. Scarred knuckles, knotted wrists, sun-cracked skin that didn't flinch from barbed wire or boiling grease. He wore the same hat every day, the same boots until they split, and carried himself like someone who'd made a deal with the land and didn't intend to break it. His wife Sarah had quieter strength, the kind you don't notice until it's missing. She taught Sunday school, pressed wildflowers in cookbooks, and kept track of everything, kids, bills, weather, and faith, with the same lined notebook. They had 4 children. Levi, the eldest, was 17 and ready to leave, but too loyal to say it out loud. He was tall like his father, but softer around the edges, quieter in his rebellion, worked the fields, saved every penny. His plan was to enlist by spring. He hadn't told anyone. Micah, 14, was the spark plug, the runner, the wild card. With a sling in his back pocket and mud on his jeans. He talked too fast and broke things just to understand how they worked. Once tried to build a zip line from the roof to the creek. Nearly took his arm off. Eli was 9 and serious. Too serious, always watching, always holding back questions like marbles he didn't want to lose. He didn't like loud noises or arguments. Spoke only when he had to. But when he did, everyone listened. And then there was Ruth, 6 years old. Red curls like a promise and a laugh that could break tension like sunlight through storm clouds. She fed Boone every morning, standing on tiptoe with a bucket too big for her hands, whispering stories no one else heard. He listened. That ox, for all his bulk and bone, lowered his head to her like she was the queen of the county. Their days ran like water over stone, up before dawn. Sarah made biscuits. William hauled firewood. The boys fed chickens, checked fences, cleared brush. Ruth tried to help, usually slowed things down, but no one had the heart to stop her. At night, they gathered by the fire. Micah bragged. Levi sat in the corner sketching engine parts. Eli read whatever he could find. Ruth fell asleep with her, head in Sarah's lap. Boone's bell faint in the distance like a heartbeat. It wasn't perfect. Money was tight. Crops had underperformed 2 seasons straight. The generator acted up every other week, but they loved, in their own ways. Rough, practical, sometimes unspoken, but love still. Boone never left the barn. He didn't need to. He knew everything that happened from where he stood. One Saturday, just before the leaves turned, Preacher Miles came up the drive. He was an old friend of Sarah's, used to teach at the high school before the Lord called him elsewhere. Wore suspenders, carried a leather Bible with a crack down the spine. He always walked like he was late for something eternal. "Just stoppin' in," he said, accepting lemonade he didn't ask for. "Heard the drought's getting rough." William nodded. "We've had worse." True, but the worse ones always take something you weren't ready to give. They didn't talk long, just enough to say they did. But as the preacher left, he turned and looked out toward the barn. "That ox of yours," he said, "reminds me of the cherubim on the ark. Big, quiet, watchful." William smirked. "He's more stubborn than holy." "Maybe, but don't. Ignore the ones God puts at your gate." Sarah watched them both. Her eyes, steady as ever, held a weight she didn't share. The week before it happened, Boone changed. He paced more, slept less, refused to eat, stamped the ground at nothing. When Micah teased him with an ear of corn, Boone didn't move. Just stared, low and still. "Maybe he's sick," Micah said. "Maybe he knows something," Sarah whispered. William laughed. "He's a damn ox, Sarah, not a prophet." But something about the way Boone stood that night right at the barn door, facing the house, unmoving, left William quiet longer than usual. Later, when the kids had gone to bed, he stood on the porch with Sarah, sipping coffee and staring into the dark. "You worried?" she asked. "Always," he said. But he didn't say why. It was a Thursday, cool, moonless, the kind of night where sound carries farther than it should. The kids were asleep. Sarah had just finished her notes. William had shut the back door and turned off the porch light. And Boone wasn't in his stall. He had broken the latch, shattered it, and now he stood in the middle of the barn aisle, facing the west wall, where the fuse box was. The smell was faint at first, acrid, electrical. Then it bloomed. Smoke. Real smoke. A spark, maybe from the tractor's old battery, maybe from the exposed wire William meant to fix last week, had caught a pile of straw, and it was growing. Boone bellowed, loud, deep, like a horn split from heaven itself. It woke Ruth first, then Eli, then Sarah. By the time William threw open the door, Boone was kicking the barn wall, hard enough to leave hoof prints, his eyes wild, his breath steaming, the cold. The barn glowed faint orange behind him. The fire was inside, alive, and Boone had brought the alarm. The door nearly flew off its hinges as William burst into the yard, boots thudding across the hard ground. The air already smelled wrong. Burnt straw, engine grease, the unmistakable heat of something getting out of hand. Boone stood in the clearing, nostrils wide, snorting, stamping like a thing possessed. The barn door was open. That much William saw. What he didn't see yet, what he couldn't see, was how fast it was spreading. Behind him, the screen door slammed open. "William?" Sarah's voice cracked out into the dark. He didn't answer. No time. He grabbed the old metal bucket from the side wall, raced to the pump, filled it halfway, and ran toward the barn. By the time he got there, flames had already eaten through the far side of the hayloft. They weren't dancing. They were crawling, hungry and fast, leaping to wooden beams like they'd been waiting all season for this one chance. The tractor's front tire was already melting, black smoke twisting into the rafters. Sparks spat from the fuse box in angry bursts. The ox didn't move. Boone just stood there, not afraid, not wild, still, like he was guarding the flames themselves. And then William saw what he hadn't seen before. The lantern, still hanging from the hook by the saddle shelf, lit, flickering. He'd forgotten to snuff it out after checking. The bridle straps, hours ago. The fire hadn't started from the fuse box, it had started with him. He didn't swear, he didn't scream. He turned and ran back toward the house, yelling the only words that mattered. "Get the kids out!" Sarah was already pulling coats from the hooks. Her voice rose like a bell in storm wind. "Levi, Micah, get Ruth and Eli out, now! Ruth, baby, grab your shoes!" Micah came thundering down the stairs, half-dressed, eyes wide. Levi was behind him, already scanning, calculating, grabbing the emergency box from under the hall bench. Eli moved slower, stiff with shock, but Ruth was crying, not out of fear. She was crying for Boone. "I have to get him. He's scared. He doesn't know." Ruth, no, he's strong, he'll be fine. No, Mama, he thinks it's his fault. Sarah bent to her daughter, hands firm on her shoulders. Listen to me. You are not going out there. You hear me? The girl shook, wild with sobs, but she didn't run. Levi swept her up in one motion and bolted through the front door. The fire was roaring now, thick, angry, rising. The barn groaned like something ancient and wounded. Sparks carried on the wind, landing in the dry grass near the chicken run. Micah followed behind with Eli, shielding his little brother from the smoke. Sarah stepped outside last. William had the hose uncoiled and was already spraying down the fence line. He knew it was useless. But doing something was better than watching. It all burn. They stood there breathless as the fire climbed higher, devouring 20 years in under 20 minutes. The tin roof hissed and buckled. The upper beam collapsed inward, sending a rush of flame down like a curtain falling. And still Boone did not move. He stood at the edge of the collapse. Ash clung to his back like snow. His hooves were planted, deep, his eyes fixed on the house. William dropped the hose. The damn ox was going to die. Dad, Levi started, but William was already moving, across the clearing. Through the smoke, one arm over his mouth, the other outstretched. Boone, move, boy, get out! The ox finally shifted, turned, and then something cracked overhead, a beam, a flaming crossbeam, falling fast. William saw it too late. But Boone didn't. He charged, not away, from right into William. The ox's shoulder hit him square in the chest, knocking him off his feet and 10 feet back. The beam crashed down where he'd just stood, hissing, popping, throwing cinders into the air. William rolled, coughing, pain shooting through his ribs. Boone stood over him, nostrils flaring, sides heaving like bellows. Sarah screamed. Levi ran, forward, dragging William away by his coat, and the barn caved in behind them. A final roar, a flash of orange. Then smoke, just smoke. And through it, Boone, limping but upright, alive. Later, none of them would quite agree on what had happened. Micah swore Boone knocked the beam aside with his horn. Eli said he saw the ox cry. Ruth said Boone looked straight at her the moment before the flames swallowed the roof. But William knew only this: that ox had saved his life, and not because he was trained, not because he was smart, because he had chosen to, in the way only something alive, watching, caring could. That night they slept in the living room, cots on the floor, windows cracked for the smoke. The air still smelled of soot and scorched hay. Ruth curled up on the couch, holding a small wooden carving Boone had broken off a fence post with his teeth. She wouldn't let it go. Eli stared at the ceiling. Micah pretended to sleep. Levi stood at the window watching the orange glow fade. Sarah sat beside William, dabbing the bruise on his ribs with a cloth soaked in vinegar and tears. He winced. "Don't fuss." She didn't answer, just pressed a kiss to his temple and said, "You could have died." So could he. Sarah nodded, but he didn't. And William, who had never prayed out loud in his life, whispered under his breath, "Thank you." No one heard, but Boone outside under the stars, resting in the ashes of the barn he once guarded, lifted his head, just once, toward the house, like he had heard every word. By morning, the barn was no longer burning, but the smoke lingered. Gray and thick, it settled across the property like fog. Ash covered everything: the chicken coop roof, the porch railings, even the scarecrow out by the southern plot. It looked like snow from a distance until you smelled it. William rose stiffly from the cot, ribs aching like they'd been run over by a freight wagon. Sarah was already in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, boiling water for coffee they didn't have anymore. Levi sat at the table with a pen, a pad, and the family ledger open flat beside him. His jaw was set in the way that only meant one thing: he was doing the math. Micah fed the chickens with hands still trembling. Ruth stayed by Boone. She hadn't left him since dawn. The ox lay under the split hickory tree, his leg bandaged with old feed sacks and salve. He didn't bellow, he didn't flinch. He just blinked slow and deep when Ruth touched his jaw, and let her hum to him the way her mama once had to her when the fever came. It was a quiet day. but it wasn't a peaceful one. That afternoon, the insurance man showed up in a black truck, with gold lettering and promises that meant very little. "I'm afraid that particular clause doesn't cover open flame," he said, hat in hand. "Unless it was an act of nature or malice, well, you're liable." William didn't argue, didn't even speak. He just walked back to the porch and sat down. The man eventually left. Sarah came out minutes later and handed him a letter. She didn't say where it came from. He opened it slowly. It was from the bank. 60 days. That's all they had. That night, William stood at the edge of the field, looking out where the barn had been. Levi joined him after a while. He stood with his arms crossed, not in rebellion, in defense. Of what, he wasn't sure. "We could sell the north field," he said. "It'd buy us time." "Time for what?" "For you to figure it out," Levi said, too fast, then softened. "For us to stay." William didn't nod, didn't scowl, just kept staring at the horizon. The silence stretched too long. Finally, Levi said, "You know, I used to think Boone was just a dumb animal, just a weight that ate through feed like we had endless bushels. But last night," he swallowed, "saw him choose you." William turned to his son, for once not with authority, but weariness. "I don't deserve that animal." Levi didn't reply. They both knew he was right. Across the yard, Ruth knelt beside Boone again, whispering prayers into his ear. She'd taken her favorite scarf and tied it around his horn, said it was a badge, for valor. Micah sat on the porch steps, elbows on knees, eyes red from smoke and something deeper. "We're not gonna make it, are we?" Eli tugged at his shirt. "Boone will help us, he always helps." Micah laughed, just once, sharp and broken. "We need more than a dumb ox now, Eli." Ruth heard it. She stood, walked across the yard, with slow, sure steps, and slapped Micah square across the cheek. "You don't deserve him," she said. "None of us do. But he still saved Daddy. He still watches the house. He still stays." Micah said nothing. Neither did Sarah, standing at the door, watching her daughter become something fierce and tender all at once. That Sunday, they didn't go to church. They gathered in the clearing instead. William brought out the old radio and played hymns soft through the crackle. Sarah brought bread and honey on a dish. Ruth placed a fresh quilt under Boone's side, and Levi read from the Psalms. It was quiet, but it was worship. Boone listened. Everyone saw it. Then came the storm. Not the kind with rain, the kind with men. First, the assessor, then the county officer, then the man from Barton Ridge, with his perfect teeth and land offers scrawled in ink. That smelled too rich, they came like a swarm. "You sell now, I'll even let you keep the house," one said. "Not the fields, not the livestock, but the house, sure. You folks like this place, sentimental and all." William didn't even answer. He just stared, and the man stepped back, because something in his eyes, even beaten, even bruised, still had a fire the barn hadn't taken. "You'll regret this," the man called out from his shiny new truck, and William replied without raising his voice, "Maybe, but at least it'll be my regret." That night, the wind came up strong. Boone stood again, slowly, painfully, and walked the fence line 3 times, then lay down by the door of the house, facing out, watching, as if waiting for something. It came 3 nights later. Not a man, not a fire, something older, a coyote first, then another, then a third, lurking, and then a scream. Not human. From the chicken coop, William ran out with the rifle, Sarah behind him. Boone was already moving. Limping, yes, but moving like thunder over dry dirt. He charged the gate, drove the first coyote straight into the far trough. The second leapt at him, claws flashing. Boone turned, took the hit, swung his horn and split the night open, blood on the ground. The third ran. William dropped the rifle. Sarah fell to her knees. Boone stood tall, still, silent. And then he lowered his head and looked straight at William. And William said aloud, "I see. You now, not to the animal, to something through the animal. The guardian, the watcher, the one who had never left. They buried 2 chickens that morning, but kept the feathers. Sarah made a wreath. Ruth laid it at Boone's feet. Micah placed one hand on his flank. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "You're not just a dumb ox," Boone blinked. And for the first time in weeks he bellowed, not in pain, in answer. Word spread in town, not about the fire, not about the bank, about the ox. Kids whispered about him like he was a legend. Farmers stopped by just to see. No one laughed anymore. The man from Barton Ridge came again. This time, with an offer double the first, and William, bruised, scarred, broke, finally spoke. He said, "I'm not selling the land that remembers me." And then he walked Boone through the yard like he was royalty. Because in that moment, he was not just a beast, a hero, a keeper, a servant of something sacred. By the end of the month, the community had raised enough to rebuild the barn. Not because they believed in William, but because Boone had. And what the ox stood for, they could no longer ignore. The new barn wasn't fancy. Just beams, shingles, and hard-earned sweat. But it stood, stronger than the old one. Simpler, too. Levi oversaw the roof. Ruth painted the stall doors. Micah shoveled dirt, muttering curses at splinters and the price of nails. Even Eli got his hands dirty, mostly by accident. But the one who watched it all day and night was Boone, the ox no one thought they needed. The ox who had become more than muscle and weight. Now, he was myth. Flesh and blood proof that loyalty still meant something. And loyalty, in a place like Coldwell Farm, was the only currency left that never lost value. By mid-autumn, word of Boone had spread past county lines. First came the journalist, some big city boy with slick hair and a camera crew that smelled like cologne and condescension. "Tell us the story," he said, crouched in the barn like Boone might grant him an exclusive. William simply replied, "He stood when no one else did." That was it. The story went viral anyway. The Guardian Ox, the paper read. Millions of views, dozens of requests, donations poured in. A feed company offered a year's supply for the animal who reminds us what standing your ground looks like. William refused half of it. "We'll take only what we need," he said. "We ain't running a zoo." But deep down, even he smiled when Boone's name showed up on the side of a grain sack. That winter, Boone got sick. Not seriously, but enough he ate less, walked slower. His leg, never fully healed, dragged slightly in the snow. Ruth noticed first. She built a straw bed twice as thick, laid quilts over him by the stove, sang again. "Stay strong," she whispered. "You're our last good thing." Boone didn't respond, but he stayed. One night during a blizzard, the generator failed. No lights, no heat, no radio. Just the sound of wind tearing through the shutters and the creak of wood begging not to break. Sarah huddled with Eli near the fireplace. William lit the lanterns by hand. "Where's Boone?" Ruth asked. William looked out. Snow, waist-high, tracks, leading to the outer fence. "He's doing his job," he said. And he was right. They found him the next morning, frozen whiskers, frost on his ears, but upright, facing the gate, shielding it with his bulk, as if to say, "You get to sleep. I'll keep watch." Spring came. The fields thawed, and so did William. He started saying goodnight instead of just nodding, started calling Sarah love again, softly, but loud enough to be heard, started holding Ruth's drawings instead of just glancing. One day, he stood beside Levi near the pasture and asked, "You still thinking of college?" Levi shrugged, thinking more about staying. "You don't owe me that." Levi turned. "No, I don't. But maybe it's not about you anymore." The community held a ceremony that summer. Not for William, not for the Coldwell family, for Boone. A plaque, a ribbon, a prayer from the preacher who once said, "God sends angels in many forms." Eli reads Psalm 23. Boone stood beside the altar. Didn't bow, didn't bellow, just stood still like the monument he'd become. And then came the day Ruth saw something else. She'd been up before dawn, brushing Boone's coat, singing old hymns. Under her breath, when she noticed the new ox in the neighbor's trailer. Young, strong, nervous. The neighbor walked up, scratched his head, figured you all might want to pass something on. William came out holding 2 mugs. He looked at the young ox, then at Boone, and Boone, old bones, scarred flanks, took 1 step forward, then another, and nudged the new ox gently. A passing of the torch, a silent command. Stand, watch, guard. William added a new sign to the barn that week, carved by hand, burned into cedar. It didn't say Coldwell Farm, didn't say private property. It said, the one who stood. Below it, just 3 letters. Boone. That night, with the sun settling like honey over the field, William and Sarah sat on the porch. Ruth read a book beside the fireplace. Micah and Eli chased chickens down the path, laughing. And Boone, he stood at the gate. Same as always, steel still in his frame, warmth still in his eyes. And when the wind rose, he didn't flinch. Because that's what guardians do. They don't run. They remember, they endure. And in the quiet, when the world forgets what matters most, they remind it. Thanks for spending time with us today. If this story meant something to you, pass it on. This is Still Standing Souls. Real stories, quiet strength, lasting hope.